The first time I realized I was the backup plan, I was 26 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen at 7 in the morning, writing a check for their electric bill while my brother slept in until noon. I didn't think much of it then. I told myself it was temporary. They were going through a rough patch. My dad's hours had been cut at the plant. My mom's knee surgery had wiped out most of their savings. My brother Oliver was 22, still finding himself, still figuring things out. Someone had to step up. I was the oldest. It made sense that it would be me. That was the beginning of what I now call the longest mistake of my life. My name is Claire, and I'm 31 years old. I'm a financial analyst at a mid-size accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. I make decent money, not wealthy, but stable, enough to cover my own rent, my own car payment, my own student loans, and apparently, for the better part of 5 years, enough to cover a second household that wasn't mine. I need to back up a little, because the story doesn't start with the money. It starts with the person I thought my brother was, and the moment I finally understood who he actually is. Oliver is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the one everyone loved immediately, charming in that easy, effortless way that makes you want to be near someone. He could talk his way into anything and out of everything. Teachers liked him. Neighbors liked him. My parents' friends would always say, "That boy is going to go so far." I believed it too. I was proud of him. Still am, in the specific way you can be proud of someone and also never want to speak to them again. After college, Oliver moved back home. He said it was to save money while he looked for work in graphic design. My parents were happy to have him. I had already moved to Columbus by then, which was only 40 minutes away, but far enough to feel like my own life. I visited most weekends. I could see, even then, that things at home were tighter than my parents let on. The carpet in the living room was worn through in patches. My mom was rationing her prescriptions because she couldn't afford the copay. My dad had stopped getting haircuts. I started helping without making it a big conversation. $50 here, a grocery run there. 1 month, I just paid their internet bill because I knew they'd been on the verge of shutting it off. Small things. Things that felt like what family does. Then the small things became medium things. And the medium things became a standing arrangement nobody ever formally agreed to. By the time I was 28, I was contributing around $1,400 a month toward my parents' household expenses. Mortgage, utilities, my mom's medication, Oliver's phone plan, which I kept telling myself I'd remove him from and never did. I was also covering my own rent in Columbus, my own bills, my own everything. My salary at the time was $78,000. It was enough to manage, barely if I didn't think too hard about the fact that I had almost nothing in savings. I didn't think too hard about it. That was the rule I'd set for myself without realizing it. Oliver, during all of this, was freelancing. Some months he brought in money, some months he didn't. He contributed nothing to the household expenses. My parents didn't ask him to. When I once gently suggested he could at least cover his own phone bill, my mom said, "He's just getting started, Claire. You know how hard it is when you're young." I was 28. I had been out of college for 6 years. I was also young. I didn't say that. I nodded and wrote the next check. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Sunday in October 2 years ago. My parents had asked me to come over. They said they wanted to have a proper family meal, just the 4 of us. I made a pot of chili and brought it over because that's the kind of thing I did. I brought food, I fixed things around the house. I stayed for hours making sure everyone was okay before driving back to Columbus alone. We were eating when my dad cleared his throat in the way he does when he has something prepared to say. He told me and Oliver that he and my mom had been talking about the future, about the house. They'd paid off the mortgage 2 years prior with significant help from me, though no one mentioned that. And they wanted to be clear about their intentions. They said they were updating their will. The house, when the time came, would go to Oliver. My mom looked at me carefully when she said it. I think she expected me to argue. Or cry. Or at least ask why. I asked why. My dad said Oliver would need the stability more. That Oliver was still building his career, still finding his footing. That I was already established, already doing well. That I didn't need it the way he did. My mom added, gently, like she was giving me a gift wrapped in soft paper. Oliver deserves to have something solid under him, Claire. You've always been so capable. You'll be fine. The chili was still warm. I could feel the steam coming off my bowl. I stared at it for a long moment. I thought about the check I had written 8 days earlier for their property tax installment, $2,200. I thought about the new water heater I'd paid for in August. I thought about every month for the last 3 years. I did the math, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop myself. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 over 5 years, most of it going toward a house that would now belong to my brother. I didn't say any of that. I nodded slowly. I said, "Okay." I finished my chili. I helped wash the dishes. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think people expect the story to be about rage, and it wasn't. Not at first. It was something quieter and more specific than rage. It was the feeling of finally understanding a contract you'd been operating under for years without ever having read the fine print. I had believed, somewhere underneath everything, that my sacrifice was being seen, that the choices I was making were being registered by the people who mattered most to me. That night in the parking lot, I understood that wasn't true. I was not being seen. I was being used. Not maliciously, maybe not even consciously, but used all the same. I went upstairs. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought very carefully about what came next. I didn't call my parents that week. I didn't call Oliver. I called my friend Simone, who has known me since college and who has the particular gift of listening without jumping in to fix things. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "When are you going to stop?" I didn't answer right away. She didn't push. She just let the question sit there. I started paying attention differently after that dinner. I had always told myself that I wasn't keeping score, that helping my family was something I did out of love, not expectation. But once I started actually paying attention, I couldn't unsee what I saw. Oliver never asked how I was doing. Not once did he check in on my finances, my workload, my stress level. When I mentioned being tired once, I had worked 3 consecutive 60-hour weeks, he told me I should try meditating. He was using my parents' house as his studio, had converted the entire basement into a workspace, and had recently, I found this out from my mom in passing, started subletting a room in a friend's place downtown on weekends. He was making money. He just wasn't contributing any of it. My mom had started calling me with a specific frequency that I now recognize as coordinated. It was always something urgent sounding but manageable. The furnace needed a filter. The car registration was coming up. The homeowner's insurance renewal had arrived, and did I have a moment to look it over? Each thing alone seemed reasonable. Together, they formed a pattern. About 3 months after the dinner, I got a call from my coworker Denise, who happened to do some freelance bookkeeping on the side. She mentioned, without knowing the full context of my situation, that she'd seen something interesting at the credit union where she did some work. She told me she couldn't give me details, but she suggested I might want to ask some questions about any property I had financial ties to. I asked her to say more. She said she'd already said too much. I went home that night and started making calls. I have enough background in finance to know where to look and who to ask. It took me 2 weeks of careful digging, but eventually, through a contact at a title company I'd worked with professionally, I found out that Oliver had taken out a personal loan using the house as informal collateral. Not a formal lien, but a private lending arrangement with someone he knew, using the house's value as leverage to secure the funds. It wasn't technically illegal, but it was deeply reckless. If he defaulted, the implications for my parents' ownership could be complicated, expensive, and potentially devastating. My parents had no idea. I sat with that information for 4 days. I wrote it down, organized it, printed the documentation my contact had been able to provide. I put it all in a folder. I made a copy. Then I drove to my parents' house on a Wednesday evening, which is unusual enough that my mom knew something was off the moment she opened the door. I sat across from both of them at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been told the house would go to Oliver, and I opened the folder. I walked them through what I had found. I was calm. I had rehearsed this, and I stayed in the rehearsed version because I knew if I let myself feel it in real time, I would fall apart, and I didn't want to fall apart. I wanted to be understood. My mom started crying before I finished. My dad got very still in the way he does when he's processing something he doesn't want to be true. When I was done, my dad said he'd talk to Oliver. My mom said Oliver probably didn't understand the risks. She said he was still figuring things out. I closed the folder. I told them I loved them. I told them I had been contributing to this household for 5 years, and that I had done it willingly, because I wanted to help and because I believed it was the right thing to do. I told them I was not angry about the will, or rather, that I had decided to let it go because I understood it was their choice to make. But I told them I was no longer in a position to continue my financial contributions, not because I couldn't afford it, but because I'd realized I couldn't afford what it was costing me in other ways. My dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked what they were supposed to do about the bills. I told them that was a conversation worth having with Oliver. I drove home. I cried somewhere around the interchange on I-70. Not sad crying, exactly. More like the kind of crying that happens when pressure releases. Like something that had been held very tight for a very long time was finally allowed to loosen. The next month was uncomfortable. My mom called twice to tell me they were struggling with the utility costs. I told her I was sorry to hear that. She called a third time and said it felt like I was abandoning them. I told her I understood why it felt that way and that I loved her. I did not write a check. Oliver texted me once. He said he'd heard I was upset and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I replied that I was doing fine. He didn't follow up. What I hadn't anticipated was what happened at my workplace. Oliver had apparently said something to a family friend of ours, who happened to know someone who knew a colleague of mine. It's a smaller world than you think when you've grown up in the same mid-sized city your whole life. Whatever version of the story Oliver told made its way back in a distorted form. That I had cut off my family. That I had always been difficult about money. That I had some kind of grudge. I heard it secondhand from a coworker who mentioned it with concern, not malice. I'll be honest, that one landed hard. Not because I thought people believed it, but because I hadn't expected to have to defend myself in that space. Work was the one place where none of this existed. Finding it there felt like a violation. I thought about addressing it directly. I thought about sending Oliver a message laying out exactly what I had documented and exactly what I would be willing to share if the narrative continued to spread. I drafted that message 3 times. I didn't send it. Instead, I did something that felt strange at the time, but now feels like the truest version of strength I've ever acted out. I printed my bank statements, 5 years of them, and I organized them in chronological order with a brief summary document my own CPA helped me draft. I put them in a binder. I let exactly 2 people outside my family see that binder, Denise, and one other person at the firm who I trusted completely. I said nothing publicly. I simply made sure that if anyone ever asked, the answer existed in documented form. The rumors faded within 6 weeks. Oliver never brought it up again. My parents called me on my birthday in March. It was a normal call. My mom told me about the azaleas she'd planted out front. My dad told me a long story about a neighbor's truck. Nobody mentioned money. Nobody mentioned Oliver's loan. Somewhere in the middle of the call, my mom said, "We've been managing better. Oliver's been helping more." She said it carefully, like she was giving me information without conceding anything. I told her I was glad to hear it. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because I think when people tell these kinds of stories, they expect a clean, satisfying ending. The moment where everything snaps into place and the person who was wronged gets to feel vindicated in some obvious way. That's not what it felt like. What it felt like was quiet. Specifically, it felt like the particular quiet of a room after a sound has stopped. Not peaceful exactly, but no longer braced for impact. I have been in therapy for 14 months. My therapist, who I found through my company's employee assistance program, told me early on that the hardest part of leaving a dynamic like the one I'd been in isn't the leaving itself. It's adjusting to the absence of the pressure you'd normalized. She was right. For the first few months, I kept waiting for something to go wrong. I checked my bank account anxiously. I'd feel guilty on the first of the month when I used to write checks and didn't. I'd dream about my parents' kitchen sometimes. Specific mundane images, the bowl of keys by the back door, the particular light in the afternoons. Slowly, though, the quiet started to feel like something I'd earned rather than something I was simply enduring. I put away $6,000 in my emergency fund by the end of last year. That's the first time I've had a real emergency fund in my adult life. I opened a Roth IRA in February. I took a long weekend in Asheville with Simone in April. The first trip I've taken for myself in 4 years. Small things, but mine. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not broken, but changed in the way that things change when the terms shift. We talk. We see each other at holidays. The warmth is real, but it's different. Like a room you've rearranged. The same walls, different furniture, different light. Oliver and I don't talk much. I don't carry bitterness about that anymore. I understand him better now than I did when I was angry at him. He found a system that worked for him, and he used it for as long as it worked. That's not a defense of what he did. It's just the truth. And the truth, when you can sit with it without the heat of betrayal underneath it, is easier to carry. There's a version of this story where I stayed, where I kept writing the checks and filing away the resentment and telling myself I was doing it out of love when the love had long since been replaced by habit and fear. I stayed in that version for a long time. I am not in it anymore. I don't know what my parents' will says now. I haven't asked. The house will go where it goes, and Oliver will do what he does with it, and none of that is my responsibility anymore. What I have right now is a savings account that is growing, a job I'm good at, an apartment that I chose because I wanted it, not because it was the cheapest option near my parents, a best friend who asks the right questions at the right time. And I have this, the specific hard-won knowledge that the people who benefit most from your silence will always have reasons why your silence is the generous, mature, loving choice. I stopped believing them. That was enough. I used to think that if I just gave enough money, enough patience, the people I loved would eventually see me clearly. Not as the responsible one, not as the one who could handle it, but as a person who also had limits. A person who also got tired. I spent 5 years waiting to be seen that way, and what I learned is that the waiting itself was part of the problem. There's a version of cause and effect that nobody talks about when it comes to family because it feels too cold, too transactional. But here it is anyway. When you make it easy for people to take from you without consequence, they will. Not because they're monsters. Not because they don't love you, but because the pattern works. And patterns that work tend to continue until something interrupts them. For 5 years, I was the thing that made the pattern work. When I stopped, the pattern had to change. That's not a punishment. That's just how cause and effect operates when you finally stop suspending it. What I had to learn, and it took me much longer than it should have, is that intelligence isn't just knowing the right answer. It's being honest about what the evidence in front of you is actually saying. I had all the evidence I needed for years. My mom's careful phrasing, my dad's silence, Oliver's absence every time something difficult needed doing. I understood all of it on some level. I just kept choosing a different interpretation because the true one was painful. Real clarity isn't comfortable. It requires you to look at something you love and say, this is what it actually is, not what I wish it were. And the thing about moral courage, the real kind, not the dramatic kind, is that it usually looks like a very quiet decision made alone in a kitchen at 10 o'clock at night. It looked like me closing a folder on that table and saying calmly that I was done. No ultimatum. No speech. Just a line I finally drew for myself because I understood that no one else was going to draw it for me. Simone asked me once months after everything whether I regretted not saying more at that birthday dinner. Whether I wished I'd confronted them right there in front of everyone. I thought about it honestly. I told her no. Because the goal was never to win an argument. The goal was to stop losing myself in one. Oliver still lives in that house as far as I know. My parents still call on holidays. My Roth IRA now has more in it than I ever managed to save in the 5 years before I stopped writing checks. Those things are all true at the same time, and I've made peace with the fact that a story doesn't have to end the way you imagined it in order to end well. What I want, if any of this reaches someone who is where I was, writing checks, making excuses, telling yourself it's love, when really it's fear, is just this. The exit is quieter than you think. You don't have to burn anything down. You just have to stop feeding the fire. That was the hardest thing I ever did. It was also the most important.